All right. Hello, loves. Welcome back to the Living Out Love podcast. We are in for such a treat today, such a unusual, rare treat, because I'm going to be interviewing my very own mom on the podcast today. I will not be interviewing her as my mom for this episode. I'm going to be interviewing her as Stephanie Foy, who, I'll let her do her own professional introduction. But the reason why I wanted to have her on is because I'm very into the practice of building your awareness of yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, how you operate in the world. I think that's really important for us if we intend to be love in the world. And I'm all about using any tool that can help you do that. And my mom happens to be an Enneagram certified coach and practitioner. And so I wanted to have her on to talk about the Enneagram with us. So, Mom, Stephanie Foy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
So why don't you just share with everybody the more, professional side of you? Who are you? What work do you do? Why did you get interested in Enneagram? Give us some of that basics.
Okay. So, I have an undergraduate degree in business. I have a master's degree in social work. My social work practice has always been at the meso level, like not doing micro. I don't do one-to-one therapy or case management, but I also don't do like public policy advocacy work. I've always focused more at the level of organizations and people within organizations. And I've been doing that work for a long time. We'll just say a long time, since you were a little bitty kid. So, and I've used a number of different tools along the way. I was introduced to the Enneagram really a long time, quite a few years back, and thought it was intriguing, but didn't really pursue it. And then as I've worked more into doing executive coaching as part of the organization development practice, I really saw the Enneagram as a tool that really lines up perfectly in support of a coaching practice. So, and it aligns very much with my worldview and my perception about how people grow, how people heal, and sort of aligning with what I would say are my spiritual values. Because, and I'll just say a little bit about the Enneagram. The Enneagram, for all that we know, is an ancient spiritual tool. It evolved out of the spiritual tradition. It was held in the spiritual traditions, in philosophy, and it was for a long time a very oral tradition. But it's always been a tool and a way of understanding self, mostly, and others. But from that view of what are people's essential characteristics and what are their motivations and what brings them to show up in the world in the way that they show up. And so, and I've done a lot of things over the years, as you know, you go down the list, Myers-Briggs, DISC, all the things that are great and are helpful. But I just got to a place where it felt like that was really surface level stuff. That's really the outward behavior. And how do we really reach to the inside? How do we get to that? So I liken the metaphor of thinking about an iceberg. And what you see with an iceberg is you see only the parts above the water. And that, to me, is where a lot of the other tools really show up, is what's showing. And so to me, the opportunity with the Enneagram is to really understand what's below the water. And oftentimes what's below the water is much bigger and much deeper than what's above the water. So to think about how do we get to understanding what are the motivations. Sometimes with lots of folks who do the Enneagram for the first time, things that were part of their subconscious, that were they weren't even aware that was how they were acting, and that was what was motivating them, and that was driving their choices and their behaviors. So for lots of people, and me included, when I got to the Enneagram, I was like, oh, this really has value for folks. And I first worked with the Enneagram with an associate and coach friend that I have. and really found it valuable and said, I really would like to do this more. So added it to my collection of tools and skills and certifications.
Yeah, I love what you said about, well, hey, you said a lot of things I really like, but one of the things that you said was that you felt like the Enneagram gets to the below the surface and it can help people identify some of the motivations that they couldn't have identified themselves. And that was exactly my experience with the Enneagram. In fact, I was thinking just this morning, I was thinking about, that we were going to interview. And I was thinking that the very first time I took the Myers-Briggs, I identified as an extrovert. And it's because I'm a 2 on the Enneagram and I just want to be loved. And my older brother was very much loved and he was an extrovert. And so from a young age, I thought, oh, I need to be like my older brother. I'm going to behave the way that he behaves and that will get me to be loved. And so it wasn't until I took the Enneagram that I was like, oh, I'm just running around like a chicken with my head cut off, trying to make sure everybody likes me. And it didn't dawn on me that other people aren't motivated by that.
Yeah.
It was shocking to me. I talked to a friend about it and her husband and I are both 2s. And we were talking about the pitfalls of being so wrapped up in what somebody else might possibly think about you. And she laughed and she said, that's so funny because I just think that's their problem. Like they're just wrong if they don't like me. And I was like, what? That's so freeing. So that's the other part that you mentioned about the Enneagram, where I think it's like when you can learn more about the way other people operate, it helps free you up differently, either in your understanding of the world or in your understanding of yourself. It's just, there's so much freedom there.
Yes. And it in my opinion, the Enneagram, understanding the Enneagram, understanding your type and the other 8 types can free a person up to be more authentic. And we look through coaching and through support, through, the sort of the debriefing of the Enneagram and coaching work is to sort of figure out how do we bring that person, whether they're a 2 or a 7, to be the highest expression of that 2 or that 7 that they could be. Because when they move into, the higher, the healthier side of their 2-ness or their 7 or 3 or whatever the number they are, whatever type they are, then it allows you so much more freedom because you can be more authentic in yourself. And then you figure out, okay, how do I integrate portions of the other? How do I use other pieces of the Enneagram? And we can talk about that to help, to support me, to move me forward, to move me past my stuck places.
Right. Before we get too deep into the specifics of the Enneagram, I want to go back to something you said earlier, which was that you felt like this was really in alignment with your worldview around growth and healing. And those are some of my favorite words. So talk to me about the quote, like worldview of the Enneagram. What's the goal?
So you could probably ask 100 Enneagram practitioners that question, and they're going to give you a similar or a different answer. But to me, the goal of the Enneagram is to provide people a framework, a tool through which to examine themselves, their behaviors, their underlying motivations, their views of the world vis-a-vis themselves and then others. So like I do a lot of work with teams, and I think it's a great tool for teams because it elevates the personal awareness and it elevates the awareness of others. And it does it in a very holistic sort of way. Did that answer your question?
I think it does. It's giving the perspective. I guess my question is, how is the Enneagram helpful for, how is it helpful?
Okay, so
like different than like the DISC or the Myers, because to me, the Myers-Briggs and the DISC they're helpful to like a level 2. Right. And Enneagram, I'm like, I'm going to put that at like an 8 in comparison, you know?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So, so let me say there's a body of work around the Enneagram, and there's a variety of tools and assessments within the Enneagram community. I, in particular, am certified with the integrative Enneagram, the IEQ9, and it gives us a whole slew of insight. I mean, like when a person does a professional report, it gives you a 20-page document. So it really is looking at, it's going to give people an indication about who is their true self, who is their real self. And in that, what are the values and ideals of that person? What are their blind spots? And it's really interesting because we all think we know our blind spots. And then when they get surfaced in the Enneagram, you see them in a whole different way.
Yes.
We talk about what's the worldview, like what is it that how people view the world. I mean, you've heard about people saying there are people who have the worldview that the world is out to get them. And then there are other people who have the worldview that the world is a safe and beautiful place. So, but within sort of those big categories, there's some really fine distinctions. And each of the nine types has a very specific worldview about how they see the world and how they operate in it. So we're talking about authentic self. We're talking about idealization. We're talking about worldview. We're talking about blind spots. We're talking about defense mechanisms. What are the defense mechanisms? Because they're different. As you just said, as a 2, I want people to like me. Well, that's a defense mechanism. That's like I've got to be these things so that other people will like me. We look at values, virtues, and vices. So those are all sort of things. And you think, well, vice is vice. No, each one has its own particular slant. It's kind of the concept of every personality thing that you think about or characteristic indicator. There's always a double-edged sword. One side of the sword is the positive and one side is the negative. And so what side of the sword are we focusing on? We want to surface all of that and bring that forward so that we can be as aware as we can be in all of our interactions.
Thank you. I think that's what I was trying to get to that I couldn't name when I was trying to figure out the difference between the Enneagram and some of the other ones is the double-edged sword, where we're looking at both the positive and the negative, because every shadow has a light, etc. And so I just think that's fantastic. Do you want to talk a little bit about each type?
Sure. So again, this goes back to ancient wisdom as best we can find. So let me just give a little bit of history about the Enneagram and the tool that I find so valuable. So as I said, as best we can tell, it's in the thousands of years old. There's really some ancient writings that indicate the Enneagram, and not only the sort of the content of the Enneagram, but even the wheel itself. The whole diagram has ancient sort of roots. And then in the 1960s, a psychiatrist working in the field said, hey, who had this interest and said, I think there's really something valuable here, started to bring it into what we would think of as modern psychology. And then, of course, it got picked up and other people took it on. And there's a number of different tools. If anybody goes out and searches on the internet, you can find all kinds of assessments from $0, up. Yeah. And what I find, because I've done some of those others, is they can be good and informative, but they're not going to give you the depth of information. And the one that, as I said, I'm certified in the IEQ9, which is an integrative Enneagram. And what I really appreciate about that, being a social worker and trained in science, is that it has all of the qualitative studies behind it. They've done all the psychometric testing. They've done all the quantitative testing. They continue to test the instrument, and it has 99.95% validity and reliability. So it really does measure and indicate in a way that's very strong. And so for me, it's not quack science. It's real science with real measurements and real data. So that's the other part that I really value and appreciate about the IEQ-9 is the science that's behind it. So, I
can attest to the detail of that because, like, you know, you already know this, but the audience won't know that my husband and I are both type 2s, but we're different type 2s. And we have some different like details within that when you pull it out, it's very, very interesting. So yes, I would say it's highly accurate and it pulls out the nuances really well.
Right. So let me talk a little bit about the 9 types, and then I'll talk about what you're talking about, which is the distinctions, which is the subtypes. Okay. Because how we really view the Enneagram, we really get down to actually 27 types because each of the 9 has 3 subtypes. So let's first talk about sort of the types. So there are 9, and the first one, the number 1 type, we call the strict perfectionist. So these folks, you know, they like order, they like structure, they like control. I'll probably, you know, some of you will say, oh, this is me. You know, they're principled, they're careful, they're conscientious. You know, they can be perfectionists, which can be good or not, depending upon, you know. But man, they are going to have self-control, and they can be critical. And their whole aim is to do the right thing and to avoid mistakes and to work towards self-control. And I would say a high-sided one is going to be looking at themselves and working on how do I show up? How can I be, you know, showing up as best as my best self? A low-sided one who hasn't, in my mind, had done their work, is going to be looking to try to impose their perfectionism on others. So that's the strict perfectionist. The number 2, the considerate helper. And the helpers they're giving, they're supportive, they're pleasing. They like to compliment others. They're generous, they're caring. They're typically friendly, interactive, warm-hearted.
What's not to love about it too? There's no downside.
What's not to love about it too? Well, so, but their motivation is that they need to be liked and appreciated. And when they don't have that sense, as you said, you were going around doing everything you thought you needed to do to be liked and to be appreciated. And so sometimes 2s get out of balance in terms of either bending over backwards or trying to stretch to be something that they're not, or they tend to be self-sacrificing and not attend to themselves, because that's the low also sided too.
You could possibly call that codependence.
Yes. Yeah. So
I don't know anything about that.
Okay.
All right.
So we've done 1 and 2. The 3 is called the competitive achiever. And these folks, they're ambitious, they're busy, they're practical, they're typically list makers, they're focused, they're competitive, but, you know, just like the perfectionists or just like the caretakers taken to the extreme, competition's not a good thing. You know, that can be, it can be cutthroat. It can be ugly opposed to
the 3s that I personally know, they're more competitive with themselves.
So that depends upon the subtype, and we'll talk about that. Okay. So, yes, 3s with a subtype of a self-preservation will be more competitive with themselves, whereas 3 other subtype 3s tend to be very competitive out in the world.
Okay.
Again, 3s are task-oriented, they're goal-oriented. They live and die by their success.
Mm.
So, and whether it's success in making a meal or success in pulling off $1 million contract, it's all, there's always measures of, was it successful? Did
Right.
it meet the goal? Did it meet the standard? And it's not necessarily a standard that anybody else sets. It's what they set for themselves.
Right.
Okay. So the 4 is a very interesting crowd. These folks are the intense creatives. And these folks, they're the ones who always want to be seen as artistic, individualistic. They never want to think that they look, act, sound, or like anybody else. Like they want to be individualized expressions. They're intense oftentimes. They can be deep because they're a highly emotional number or characteristic, not unlike a 2, but in a different way than a 2.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
I think so.
Let me think if I can tell you who I think of as a person that we both know named Mary is a 4.
Well, I was trying to think of artists or like pop culture people that somebody might know.
Yeah.
But the person I thought of, you probably wouldn't know, but I was thinking of maybe like a Kesha or a Lady Gaga. Like they're both not about, or even maybe Madonna.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about that. So it can be artists, but a lot of times you'll see those people as also 3s. They're also going to have a strong achiever orientation, that they're going for success no matter what it looks like.
Okay.
So, because the 3s that are the subtype SO, they like to be center stage. They like to be out front. So
I'd be curious, and this is a whole other conversation, but while we're on the topic of 4s and they like want to be individualized, are there more 4s in the United States than you think in maybe some other countries? Because the United States culturally is so, it's not about that. Okay.
Well, what? So 4s, well, actually, the United States, if we really want to talk about the culture of the United States, we are what some people consider to be a 3-7-8 culture. So 3, success, goal oriented, take care of yourself, be successful. 7, visionary, enthusiastic, outgoing. This is who gets
rewarded.
Who gets rewarded, what corporate culture, what, and sort of what's the general milieu in the United States. So 7, and then we'll talk about 8. So when we get to 7 and 8, when you think about those 3 numbers kind of pinned together, you can see how it shows up in the culture. So
yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah. Okay. So 5s are considered the quiet specialist. These are the folks that they think a lot, they analyze a lot, they like to solve problems, they can be quite shy, they can seem detached, they can be reserved, they can be reflective, they are private. These are folks that you, in a group, have to be sure that you encourage them to participate, because otherwise they're going to think, and then they may come back later, in an email or whatever, like in a team setting, but they're typically very private people, and their goal is to really learn and to know as much as they can, because they want to go deep within whatever it is that they want to learn about or think about. They're going to go deep in that thing. So you could, cerebral, and then their motivation is to understand, like we talked about 2s, the motivation is to be liked. The motivation for 4s is they have to be unique and they have to be authentic. So
yeah,
3s have to succeed.
Okay.
So the 6 is called the loyal skeptic, and they're motivation is to be safe and to belong. So these folks are always, they're the ones who are looking around the corner. What's going to happen? They're the ones that can be anxious. They're the ones that are looking for the other shoe to drop. So they're cautious, they're skeptical, they're anxious.
They don't sound like a good time.
Those are the folks that can be on high alert. So they're valuable in society, and truthfully, there's a lot of people in police work and that fall in the 6 category. Okay. So the value, though, think about this, they may not be fun to some of us that are on other number types, but the value of a 6 is in conjunction with others in a team setting. They will and can anticipate the problems. Whereas some other numbers will just forge ahead and they'll go off the cliff, and it's the 6s that will keep people from going off the cliff. They'll be the ones that'll be like, okay, have you thought about this? What about that? And it will drive some people crazy, but it's very valuable. If you can come around to the value of the 6, they can really make a contribution.
Interesting. So is 7 also a skeptic? Are we going to have 3 skeptics?
Oh, no. 7s, these are the enthusiastic visionaries.
The people we love to follow. The
people we love to follow, and the people that are, this is the most playful number on the Enneagram wheel. Out of all the 9s, the 7 has, they want to experience everything. And they want to avoid pain. They are looking for pleasure.
Wow.
They're looking for fun. So they're optimistic. They're fun loving. They're spontaneous. They can be restless. They can, they're often very entrepreneurial, and they can also be very uninhibited. The flip side of that is that an unhealed 7, and I was introduced to one not too long ago, and it was like his pattern had been in his life that every time something got hard, he'd just leave. He was in an organization that got hard. Rather than dig in and try to make a success out of it, I'm out. I'm going to the beach. I'll get a job later or whatever. So that's very sort of 7 energy. So that's the negative side of 7. The positive side of 7 is, man, they can be. So our joint friend, Jean, 7.
Yeah. My elder brother, whom I thought I should be like, 7.
Yes. So they can have a real positive outlook. On the other side, 7s can have a monkey mind. They can have a hard time focusing because they're doing this and doing this and doing this and doing that. Doing the other
new
thing.
shiny object.
Yeah, let me go to the next thing. Let me do this next thing. Let me, they're going to be constantly, but they're a lot of fun, and they're going to organize. They are looking to bring other people into their sphere of enthusiasm and experience.
Okay, so it's a little bit social also.
Yes.
Okay.
They can be social. Even the self-preservation 7s can be social. Okay. So that's sort of who they show up as. Okay. So if you're looking, again, when we look at team and organizations, it's fabulous to have a 7. You just have to be sure you're backing them up with some other folks that,
Yeah, like a 1.
Yeah, and 3s that fill in with structure and order and things that get things done. And not that 7s don't. So let's be sure. All of the Enneagram numbers can pick up and take on things from the others. It's not like, oh, if you're a 7, you're never organized. No, that's not the case. But they have to be mindful of it so that they're working through things. So, Okay. 8. 8 are the active controllers. These are the people that are powerful. They're direct. They're strong. They take charge. They're decisive. They're self-assured. They don't mind being confrontational. They can be frank. They can be magnetic, and they can certainly be power hungry.
Interesting. Okay.
Their motivation is to be strong and in control. They don't like it when they're not in control.
As a 2, I'm like, I can't even fathom what it would be like to be that person.
Yeah.
Like, what? Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, but I do know an 8, so it's been helpful to get to see it in action.
Yeah. 8s don't like to be vulnerable. They sure don't like to be exposed. They don't like to be seen as weak. And they'll do all kinds of things to cover that part up, even when it doesn't serve them. So,
and you said the United States was 3, 7, and 8. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Well, you think about goal-oriented 3s, visionaries, and then
I got this. I'm tough and I'm in large and in charge.
Yeah, and we're direct and we're the powerful country. Whereas think about Japan, not a 3, 7, 8 country. Not in this, think about their culture. Yeah.
Interesting.
So, and then finally, the number 9 is the adaptive peacemaker. And these folks, they're easygoing, they're unassuming, they can be patient, they can be accommodating, and sort of like a 2, but in a different way, accommodating to a fault, because oftentimes they'll be like accommodating, and it's not because they're seeking somebody else's approval like a 2 is, but because they don't know their own mind. They're not focused enough on their own self to understand what is it that they need and want. So, they're non-aggressive. They can be very fair, and they strive to keep balance. They want harmony and peace. And in some cases, they want harmony and peace at all costs, even if it's not good for them. So, so again, every one of the numbers has high sides and low sides, and we just look to strengthen the high sides and work with the low sides and understand it. So
I'm curious. I feel like I should know the answer to this, but I don't remember. Let's say, so my number is a 2. Is there anything important about number 1 or number 3? Like, I'm sandwiched for all the numbers the way the wheel is set up, not just 2, but is that significant?
So let me say, okay, there's different elements of working with the Enneagram, and what you're talking about is a concept called wings. So what's on either side of the number? So you want to talk about wings, or you want to talk about subtypes?
I want to talk about everything.
Okay. All right.
So wings are a thing was my first question. Is like, it's because like in astrology, it's a wheel, and it's like each sign was the answer to the sign before. Right. And so I was curious about how that works with the Enneagram. It's not a wheel, it's 9 points in a circle.
Yes, it is in a circle, and maybe we'll upload a diagram, have an image. So, let me say about wings. So there are some Enneagram tools out there that will give you, we'll say you're a 2 with a 6 wing. Well, that doesn't make any sense, because the Enneagram itself is a wheel, and if you think about a bird, their wings are not as disjointed, and you always have 2 of them. Have you ever seen a bird fly with 1 wing? Not so much. So in the integrative approach to the Enneagram, we follow the model that there's 2 wings, that every number has 2 wings. So as a 2, your wing is a 1 and a 3. And for most people, like your handedness, like you have probably developed 1 wing more than the other. As a way to stretch, like, okay, my 2's not working, let me lean to 3 or 1. So what we do through coaching and through working with the Enneagram is to look to see what are ways in which, because it's much easier for a 2, because 1 and 3 are close, is to integrate elements of that 1 and 3, because they're closer to you than, say, going across the wheel to a 6 or 7.
Right. And like when you were talking to me about 8, I was like, that's no man's land. I'm not familiar with that at all.
Yes.
That's a total different thing.
Yes. So, wings are those numbers on to either side. And so, a 9 has an 8 and a 1 wing. A 4 has a 5 and a 3 wing. So every number has 2 wings. And we know that, like I said, some people are going to be more developed in some areas than the other. And in fact, I recently did a coaching with a gentleman who believed he was he believed he was a 5, and what it really turned out was he wasn't a 5, he was a 4. But he was leaning into the 5 because that was sort of what was being called on from him. And truthfully, in his relationship, in his primary relationship, 5 was like more comfortable. It was more comfortable to be a 5 than it was to be a 4. So, so sometimes we sabotage ourselves by, there's value in the wings, but if we go too much towards them, then we're out of sync. We're out of balance. Our goal here, as the name suggests, integrative Enneagram, which is understand self and integrate the highest and best of ourselves and the other things that we can use at our disposal to make our life work better.
Okay.
So the 3 subtypes, I'm going to talk about subtypes a little bit.
Yes, please do.
So the way I think about subtypes is like you go to a really nice ice cream store and you pick out your favorite flavor of ice cream. And then they have all those mix-ins, like you can mix in gummies, or you can mix in chocolate, or you can mix in coconut. The same ice cream, the same type, you go and you might mix in
Oreos.
And Jared, the other 2, he might go get the same flavor of ice cream, but if he mixes in fresh strawberries, you see the experience of the 2, even though the base thing, the ice cream is still the same, but how people experience it's going to be different. So to me, think about it like ice cream toppings.
Yeah. And I want to interject real quick before you describe the subtypes and remind our audience that this is specific to the integrative Enneagram, and that if you just go online and take an Enneagram quiz, you're not going to hit the subtypes.
No, you won't.
So, okay. But it's so valuable. So please explain.
So there's 3 subtypes for each of the 9 types. And the 3 subtypes are the same for all the 9s. So all 9 types. So that's how we get to that 27. One of the subtypes is called self-preservation. So these folks, on a broad stroke, are looking to bring forth their expression as a way to preserve themselves. And it's not necessarily that they're doing it out of selfish reasons. It's not like, oh, let me just focus on me and the rest. The high-minded self says, when I take care of myself, 1, it leaves other people free to be themselves because I'm not over there messing in their business. And also, when I attend to myself, then I'm fully responsible for me, and that allows other people to be responsible for them. So that's the focus of the self-preservation. The SX, which is 1-to-1, and their focus, just like it sounds, 1-to-1. They're going to be very relationship oriented. Their currency, their exchange, their, how they perceive their value in the world is in the relationships that they create, and specifically one-on-one relationships. Mm-hmm. So not surprising that a lot of people in coaching relationships are 1-to-1s, the SX type. A lot of people in sort of advising and counseling. You can think about stockbrokers. You can think about other people that would see their exchange in that sort of 1-to-1 sort of role. So and then the third type is the SO. And that, folks, those are the socials. And their currency, where they operate is in group. They're in group. Their mindset is around we, and they operate well in hierarchy. They operate well in big structures. So like we were talking about threes, we'll just say those competitive achievers. You think about an achiever who has an SO subtype. Well, a 3SO, where do you think they're going to want to be? Center stage. You know, they're going to want to be out here and, you know, look at me, see me.
Yeah,
stuff.
I could see that being like an athlete because they're competing with somebody other than themselves.
Exactly.
Okay.
So those are the three subtypes. So we overlay that then, like you just said a little while ago, you're a 2 and you're one type of 2 and your husband is a 2 and he's another type of 2.
And it's hilarious to find the nuances in the way that we see things.
Yes.
it's
really interesting.
It is.
Yeah. So it's not only the motivation, it's the currency, but then it's how that 2 gets expressed.
Yeah.
So we talked about wings. We've talked about subtypes. The other key element of the integrative Enneagram is called the lines, working the lines. And the lines are the places where we look to see what are the areas. So if you think about, we'll post an image somehow.
Sure.
But within the Enneagram diagram, there's lines that make connections within the numbers. And so we look to see what are those triadic numbers and the lines that connect them, because let's say for a 9, their lines are going to be connected to 3 and 6. So they can look to see, and what the lines indicate to us are what are the ways that we need to, under stress, what is the thing where do we need to move to in order to get balance? What's going to work for us to get us out of, when we're stuck? Because people get stuck. So it's like, well, if I'm stuck and I'm a 2 and I just keep being a 2, it's not going to, it's like, I'll just be more 2. Well, that's okay. But, you might could say, okay, well, let's see, if I'm a 2, I could lean into my lines, and that's going to give me a stretched place and a release place. So we're looking for the ways that we can find release.
So let me make sure I'm understanding this. So I'm a 2. I have 2 wings. My wings are 1 and 3. And those are places that I can lean into relatively easily when I need them.
Right.
And then the lines, there's one that's a stretch and one that's a release.
Right.
So a stretch, in terms of like a stretch goal, like something I have to move towards.
Well, this is going to be funny. So the stretch line for a 2 is 8.
8. Oh, that's so brutal.
You just said, I can't even imagine it. I don't even know. So that's so 8 is like, okay, I need to develop my personal power. I can express my anger.
Oh, that's allowed?
Yes. Okay. I can care less how other people think about me, because 8s don't give a doodah what other people think. So
that is wild to me.
Stretching into 8, you can see how that would be a growth area for a 2.
Right. And then what's my release? Tell me how I relax.
So release for the 2 is to move towards the 4, which is that deep, authentic, emotional,
individual.
Yes. Go deep inside yourself. Follow your dreams. Increase your creativity.
Well, that rings true.
Those 4s are so creative, So
do we have time real quick to go tell each number their lines, their stretch and their release?
Right.
So we've done 2. Let's go back to 1 and then.
Okay. All right. So let's go to the release lines first, because those are the easy ones. Okay. Yeah. So the 1, remember, they're perfectionist.
Yes.
So what would you guess would be their release?
Something creative.
How about 7?
I was thinking about my older brother.
Playful, integrate fun, be playful, become more spontaneous, explore more possibilities, because take some of the control off. So that sort of makes sense, right? Yep. So that would be a release for a 1. Yeah. So so you want to do all the release lines, or you want me to give the stretch line?
Let's go ahead and give the stretch line for 1.
Okay, so the stretch line for 1 is the 4, because they're so busy being controlling and perfectionist. Creativity is messy.
Yeah.
And a strict perfectionist, they're going to want mess. They don't like mess. So they need to work on being creative. They can work on developing deep connections, having that emotional availability, and looking to be more fluid in their work style, which is how 4 show up.
So I'm going to plant a seed and we're going to come back to it. But I was thinking about couples, because I'm a 2 and my 4 was my release. And I was thinking, if I was in a couple with a number 1 and I'm like, let's go on a date, let's go do 4Z. That's like a real challenge for my partner.
Yes. Oh yeah. Let's go. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like, that doesn't sound fun.
Yeah.
So we'll pin that and come back to it. But I think the idea of looking at relationships is interesting. Okay. So let's go to number 3 and talk release and stretch.
Okay, so number 3, their release line is to be more, is a 6. So
anticipating
instead of going full bore head, which is what a 3 can do. And in this case, a 6, because they're skeptical and because they're loyal. They're very loyal, so they're loyal to group, whereas sometimes a 3's not.
Oh, okay.
So a 3 needs to work on putting the team first, honoring their own insights and being more emotionally available, and then also being willing to be more authentic and exposed and honest, because, 3s sometimes will, it's not that they're being dishonest, but they're just not fully exposing because they're so busy trying to be successful.
Right.
So, little honesty is going to get in my way of getting to the goal.
Right.
So then the stretch line for the 3, you're going to think this is funny, is the 9. Oh,
man.
Peacemaker,
Yeah, that makes sense.
They, and remember, people in the 9 category, remember, they're slow. They want to.
They got to gather all the data, make sure everybody's happy and at peace.
They want to have harmony. They want to have. They're going to be accepting and accommodating. That's not a natural tendency for. No. That's not the natural tendency for the 3. So learning to collaborate, learning to relax, learning to have humility. Those are stretch areas for the 3.
Interesting. Okay, so let's go to 4.
Okay, 4. The release line on the 4 is the 1. They need to take care of business. They need to practice precision, and they need to be more assertive when they share their thinking.
Okay.
So,
yep, I can see that.
And then the stretch line for the 4 is the 2. So they need to be more optimistic, be easy and comfortable to deal with, because sometimes 4s are a little bit prickly, because remember, they have to be authentic and unique. Right. So, whereas 2s are more accommodating, and then focusing on others. Whereas those 4s are so individualistic, that's a stretch to go to where the 2 is.
Yeah.
In how they regard others. Okay, 5s. The release line for the 5. Now remember, the 5 is the quiet specialist.
Okay. Yep.
So the release line for the 5 is 8. Claim your power. Take up more space. Assert yourself. So there's somebody within our circle of influence that's very much a 5.
Yes.
You can, and so moving into that 8, that's a whoa, but gives you gives you energy to move into your release lines.
Well,
So-
and everybody that's around that 5 that you and I are thinking of, it's like when they step into 8, we're all like, where you been? Glad you're here. We've all been waiting.
Yeah.
We're all ready for you to be the 8.
Yes. Yeah. Come on and show up here. Okay. So then the stretch line for the 5, remember, they're quiet specialists. They're going deep. They're methodical. They're analyzing. Well, they need to become more spontaneous, allow their energy to flow, have more fun. So they need to stretch into the 7.
7.
Yeah.
Yep. All
So-
right.
All right. And then the 6s, remember, those are our loyal skeptics.
Yep.
So their release is the 9. So
Oh, okay. So let's see.
they need to spend time going with the flow. They need to relax. They need to give themselves permission to connect with nature and themselves in a way that's different, because they're so,
Yeah.
things waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Right.
Okay.
Risk assessors.
Yes, they are. Yeah. Well, and it's really interesting. So there's a group that I'm working with that the person who's over compliance, 6,
6.
strong 6. Okay. So perfect, but he's in a perfect role.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good role. Okay. So the stretch lines for the 6 is the 3. So focusing on results, taking credit for their contributions, taking action, because 3s are highly action oriented. So 6s, because they're so anxious and they're so concerned about what could happen, that sometimes they get frozen in inaction.
Right. I need to dive in.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. 7s.
So 7s are the ones that I idealize, not just because my older brother, but because of some other people that we know. So I'm always like, 7. There's nothing wrong with the 7. They don't have a stretch.
Yeah. The 7s, they need to spend time alone. They need to learn how to manage their own energy, because their energy, can just be like all over the place.
Yeah. Okay.
You know that. You've experienced that. And they need to be willing to acquire a depth of knowledge. They need to be willing to spend the time and the focus to acquire deeper knowledge than sometimes they just hit the surface and keep going.
Okay. So what's their release? And
the release for the 7 is the 5.
Okay. The quiet skeptic.
Yes. And their stretch is the 1.
Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Completing tasks early, taking time to do things right, paying attention to the details on a regular basis.
Yeah, this is really interesting. So they're all like equilateral triangles on
They're
this
all
chart.
they're not quite triangles, but they're close.
Okay.
The 3, 6, 9 is the true triangle, and everything else is
just
right. Sort of triangles, but not exactly.
Okay.
And then, so we did 7s. Okay, how about 8s? 8s, you're going to love this. So the release line for the 8 is to go towards 2.
That is so weird. I'm thinking of the 8 that I know, and I'm like, really? All right.
Yeah. So allowing their warmth to show.
Oh.
Acknowledging the best in others. Nurturing generosity, nurturing spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So 8, that's a release line.
Release. That's interesting. I would have thought that would be their stretch.
Right. Oh, and then their stretch line for the 8 is the 5. Taking time out, because they're large and in charge. They're bulls. They're going. They're chart full speed ahead. So to take time back and to be quiet, and to conserve their energy and honor their mind. Like, that's a whole, think about the 8, and like,
Right.
are they a regular meditator? Probably not. Like,
Right.
you just think about, so moving into that quiet specialist is gonna, if they could do that, you think about what kind of growth that would give them, because, when they do sit and they do reflect and they do gain that insight and that wisdom from being quiet and from being reflective, then when they go out into action and they go back into their 8, they're taking so much with them. But most of the time the 8s they're just out here doing.
Right.
So, okay, 9, so that's our last number.
Mm-hmm.
So the release line for the 9 is to move towards 3, which is to move into action, focus on the results, develop self-confidence, be more directive, set goals.
And wasn't 3's stretch number 9? So do those numbers do the triangles always flow, like, if 9's numbers were 9's numbers 6 and 3, or no?
Yes, 9's numbers are 6 and 3. 3's numbers are 6 and 9.
6 and 9. Oh, okay, got it. Okay, so that's always the case.
Yes, so whatever you're always
triangulated with. Gotcha.
Right.
Oh, interesting. Yes. Okay.
So you're always triangulated 2, 4, and 8. 8, 2, and 4.
Yep. Okay, and then 1, 5, and 7.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, so sorry I interrupted at 9.
That's all right. So 9, their release is the 3, which is taking action, being directive, not being passive, not being accommodating. And then their stretch is 6, trusting their insights, being courageous, analyzing risk.
Yeah, I was going to say, to me, 9 feels more emotional and 6 feels more analytical.
Mm-hmm.
So, gosh, that's so interesting. To me, I need to look up the term sacred geometry. Do you know that term?
Yes. And there's lots of conversation how the Enneagram is part of that sacred geometry that was, in the ancient.
Right. It seems like it must be to the way that the number, and it makes sense.
Yeah.
Which is so funny that I was like, I don't understand an 8. So I know we're going long, but I assume you can go long with me because it's just such interesting information. So we touched a little bit earlier on like relationships, and I was calling out before I even realized the numbers about 2, 4, and 8. I was thinking about one of my children who I would guess is a 1, and you were saying that, is it 1? 4 is hard for them?
Their stretch line is 4, yes.
And so I was thinking how as a 2, 4 feels so good and nurturing to me that's where I want to go to relate to people, as I want to go to the 4.
Yeah.
But that's going to be really painful for a 1. So in general, I'm curious, do you do a lot of, either parent coaching or one-to-one relationship coaching? Do you prefer working with organizations where you're looking at, okay, like what numbers are present in the room and what isn't? Like how do you personally like to work with the Enneagram?
Always, anyway, because to me, it's like any door that's the way in for people to gain awareness, whatever that looks like for them. So lots of work that I get to do is around organization. So I'm doing the Enneagram with the team or with an individual. And the lovely thing about the integrative, the IEQ-9, is that we have the capacity to do teams reports and we have the capacity to do couples reports. So it really it not only takes the content of the individual, but it really puts it in context of the relationship, whether it's the team or the couple. So that's really fun. So to me, it's like whatever is the doorway, whatever shows up, there's opportunity there to learn and to grow.
Yeah. So I would say, compared to most humans on the planet, you have a lot of awareness, not just about your own self, but also just you've you've been exposed to a lot of different lenses and a lot of different tools.
Yes.
When Enneagram came into your life, your children were all adults already.
Yes.
But I'm curious, since learning the Enneagram and being able to identify your adult children's types, obviously me included, do you feel as though it has helped you parent differently? And I know we're adults, so parenting looks very different, but still, even as adult children, we want your support. And so
Yes, because it's given me a lot more, I'll just say patience and understanding. Well,
Okay.
I'll ask you, do you believe that's true? Because what I feel like is that I have a different lens through which to view each of you, because now I can see you differently.
I feel like it's true. I wouldn't have guessed when you said patience, I wouldn't have guessed that, which is partially why it's funny, but it makes sense. I definitely feel as though some of the conversations that we've had since we've identified my counter type 2 are conversations that we've had before, but because we have the common lingo, it's like we're able to have them more accurately and with more substance. It was sort of like before we would kind of dance around a topic, whereas now we can call it a topic.
Yes,
like,
yes.
This is you being 2, and like, let's figure this is shadow 2, let's figure it out,
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So that to me is also the value of working with the Enneagram in teams or in couples, because it does give you a language that affords each of the people in the team or the couple the opportunity to engage with each other, and it's not a make wrong.
Right.
Does that make sense? I hope that when we like in the conversation you were talking about, okay, this is just you being a 2 and this is the shadow side of 2. It's not like you, Amy, are a bad, wrong person. This is just you've dipped over into that dark side of 2. Let's shine some light on that.
Right.
So to me, it really can give people such a hopeful, positive way to deal with differences.
Right. I think for me, when you learn about other people's numbers, it's so humanizing. Like for me, the idea of the number 8 was like not even human to me, because that's so different. And so if an 8 was to try to explain to me that they were in pain, I think there's a large part of me that wouldn't have even believed them.
Right.
Because their experience is so different from my own. My brain doesn't know how to make sense of it. So for me, like now having a greater understanding of 8, if that 8 in my life came to me and said, this is really painful, I could believe them differently. Whereas before, yes, I couldn't have even believed it, because what they're describing as painful isn't painful to me.
Exactly.
So it's like, it's so helpful to have those things. And I think it's also helpful, I would guess as a 3, it's probably hard for you to slow down and put up with all the other numbers in your life. For me as a 2, I've been realizing how often I've actually sabotaged relationships because my self-pres 2 keeps me on. But do you like me? Isn't this about me? But do you like me? Whereas I'll look back and go, oh, they were just genuinely reaching out because they wanted support. And if I hadn't made it about whether or not they liked me, I could have just genuinely supported them and like done the high road too.
Right.
But until I had identified that aspect in myself, I never would have caught it.
Yeah. So that's the absolute, to me, the value of working with the Enneagram is really just to develop greater and greater self-awareness. And to me, working with the Enneagram, it's not a like, okay, I did the assessment, I had the debrief, done. No, it's like, and okay, so here's a question. So people do ask, do my numbers change? So typically, what is your core number is not going to change. And there's lots of conversation about, is it nature? Is it nurture? Were you born that way? What we don't really know. But so what we do think, and what we have shown over time, is that people's core number doesn't change. So you're always going to be a 2. How aware you are as a 2 should change. What's your level of awareness? What's your level of integration that should change. And so hopefully you're a more mature two, you're a more enlightened two as you go along. And the truth is, things change. Our life changes. You know, we have life experiences that cause us to revert back or to have a new situation around which we have to reassemble and re-examine. Okay, what am I going to do here? How am I going to work through this?
Right. Being a 2 as a business owner is very different than being a 2 as an assistant store manager.
Yes.
And being a 2 as a parent is a very, very different experience than being a 2 as a wife. Like, it's just, whoa, there's layers and aspects and yeah.
So, but you find, to me, it's like you continue to see the value of self-understanding and self-awareness through the lens of the Enneagram to apply to wife 2, mother 2, daughter 2, business owner 2, you know, all of those things.
Oh man. Well, I'm so excited. I actually, before we started our call, I was recording the podcast episode that's going to air after this one.
Yeah.
And the topic is like, what is the assignment? And so like the assignment is always to show up as love in the world. Like that's the assignment. But then what does that mean? And I think you can't know the answer to that unless you know yourself well enough.
Right. Well, and let's think about this. Think about how each of those numbers, how love would be expressed.
Exactly.
Because, you know, an 8 is not going to love like a 2.
Right. It's going to be very different.
It's going to be very different. And they're going to think they're loving. And
they might be. They are.
But somebody else, and that's, you know, that's really the value of understanding, because let's say that you're working with somebody or you're in a relationship with somebody who's a very different type from you. And it's like they're thinking that they're being loving and attentive. Right. And you're going, what, you know, what is this? No,
yes.
You're not giving me what I need.
Right.
Yeah. You're not giving me what I need. I need you to do this way. Or I need you to be that way. So I think it just gives people more, it can give people more space to be gracious to others and to allow space for other people to show up fully.
Absolutely. And it's a great tool for increasing your awareness of self and of other, so that you can know what the assignment is, you know, whether that's love or growth or healing. What's the shadow? What's the other edge of the sword, so to speak?
Yeah. Where's my high side and where's my low side?
Yes. Well, Stephanie Foy, before we sign off, if anybody wants to follow up with you about Enneagram or has questions, where can they find you?
They can find me at foyandassociates.co. And there's a link on the website to the Enneagram and information there about how to find me and how to pursue Enneagram for yourself or your loved ones or your team or your organization.
Perfect. Thank you. And we'll have images or links to images in the show notes as we discussed. So thank you for staying on with me and going a little over. This was such a lovely, fun, just conversation. I think compared to other Enneagram conversations I've heard on podcasts, I've never heard this much discussion with the wings and the stretch and release. So I think everybody's going to get a lot out of it. And I so appreciate your time.
Sure. It was fun.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.